Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.
Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden, increase the curb appeal of your yard, and share information on all plants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. A lot of customers like to come to Burke Nursery and Garden Center for either special living gifts for people they love, or they like to find plants that look great in those small nooks and crannies of their homes or offices or even the patios. And the first plant they're often attracted to are the bonsai plants. These small plants that definitely bring the outdoors inside. Today, I am very excited to welcome our bonsai expert, Aaron Stratten. And Aaron, I am so glad that you can join us for this show on bonsai plants and their care.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and excited to talk about this hobby that I love so much.
Well, Aaron, before we get into you talking about your hobby, I'd like to mention that you are president of the Northern Virginia Bonsai Society and a bonsai artist for 25 years. And I think that's important for people to understand that the bonsai lovers, enthusiasts, most of you are artists.
Absolutely.
And then in addition to being the president of the Northern Virginia Bonsai Society, you also mentor other people, other bonsai enthusiasts, right?
That's right. We work with all sorts of bonsai practitioners in our area. In Northern Virginia Bonsai Society, we have new members coming to us all the time. Sometimes we'll get a new member who's an experienced bonsai artist. Other times, brand new to the art, just picked up their first tree at a nursery, and they're looking for support.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what attracted you to these plants, and what makes a plant a bonsai?
You know, in the bonsai world, so many people think of most bonsai practitioners as having an origin story of a sort. What is it that happened that brought you to bonsai? And the best I can remember, way back in 1996 or so, being attracted to it in some way. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I bought a book, and I know exactly which book it was. Bought that book, read that book from cover to cover multiple times, I'm sure, and started getting my hands on trees and getting into that beginning part. But I think coming to bonsai is part love of art and part love of nature, and those certainly come together really well for me. You asked, what is bonsai?
Yeah, so what makes a plant a bonsai?
The word bonsai is a good place to start. As a Japanese term, there's two parts of the word bonsai, and that's basically a tray with a plant, okay? So literally translated, bonsai means a tree in a pot.
Oh, all right.
So it's a very easy place to start, but a tree in a pot can be lots of things, including I've put a tree in a pot and I keep it alive there. But the art of bonsai goes much further than that. And the essence of the way it's described most of the time is trying to represent nature in miniature by representing the image of an old tree in a small form.
And not only that, but my understanding is that, yes, that bonsai started in China, but it was the Japanese that made it into a true art form. And that, as you mentioned, and these are lovely examples that you have here, that bonsai is a tree that is in a pot, and yet also recently, if people come into the store, they not only have, or go online even, they not only have the trees, but they have what we call the herbaceous bonsais. For example, like this jade bonsai right here. Or they have a succulent bonsai as well. So that seems to have hit the market as well. If a person is looking at a bonsai, What do you recommend they look for?
Well, you absolutely make an important point. A bonsai, when you think of the definition of it as a tree in a pot, you want to think, okay, well, what kind of tree? And historically, it has been mostly trees and shrubs. One of the ways that I've heard it described often is anything with a woody trunk or something that can resemble the trunk of a tree and branching can be used as bonsai. And that's where your examples of herbaceous and succulents come in. If you have an herbaceous plant that appears to have a trunk with branches,
and
so
if
that
we
you
could
can
just show this again, if you
Sure,
don't mind.
sure.
This jade here has exactly what you're talking about. It has the trunk here. It has the branches that are coming out.
And so when you talk about another tree that has branching and leaves and a trunk, all of these are the characteristics that you're looking for to develop some image of a tree. And sticking with that artistic definition of bonsai, a tree in a pot, or the image of a much bigger tree in miniature, you can do that with any type of plant that will allow you to.
I mean, I just think it's wonderful. We used to have a customer that would come into the store and he'd run over to where we sold our little juniper bushes, and he would literally come back and say, I'm making this a bonsai for you right now. And he would just shape it, and I mean, the artistry, within 10-15 minutes, it looked like a bonsai, and he would bring it home and make it a bonsai tree. So it's just phenomenal. Well, if I were to purchase a bonsai, then how do we take care of them? Because sadly, there's a lot of people that come back and say it's dead.
I'm
and
sure.
We're talking 30 days later.
We know it happens in our bonsai society as well, because people come to us for help and sometimes it's too late, right?
Right.
So the first thing you have to know, and as you introduced the show today, you were sharing, people are looking for that plant that's going to make a little spot special. Here's a place in my home, or a little nook where I'd love to put a plant. The very first thing you have to understand is that all plants need light, and many bonsai need a lot of light. And I think number one challenge that bonsai folks have, people who are new to the art form and don't know yet, is that they get a tree and then they want it to be inside, and maybe they want it to be in their office and on their desk. But if there's not enough light there, that tree is not going to do well. The vast majority of bonsai are trees that should be outside. Many of them, most of them, all year round. The examples that I have here, the larger examples in the back, are a boxwood. Many of us may have boxwood in our gardens growing in the ground. And so boxwood is a type of plant that can live outside year round. And then further over to my left is a group of maples. These are amber maples. Amber maples, again, a type of plant that would grow in our area. And so these plants need to stay outside year round. The smaller tree in the front is a ficus, which is a tropical variety. And the examples that you're showing there with the jade and the succulents, those are more tropical plants that are more suited to indoors. So the very first thing that someone interested in purchasing a bonsai needs to think about is, where am I going to be able to keep this plant? Do I have space outside, or does it need to be inside? Even my tropical plants, like the ficus here and others like it at home, that need to be inside in the winter, I still want them outside during the summer, so that they're going to get as much light as possible when the weather's warm enough, so that they can be strong and thrive. Because our number one goal with a bonsai, despite any art that we want to do with it, is to have a healthy tree. If that tree's not alive, then we don't have a bonsai anymore, right?
And I mean, where was it that I saw a bonsai collection where a bonsai tree was actually over 100 years old?
Absolutely, and much more. In fact, there is, so representing the nursery, we know that there are small plants available. You can go into a nursery and buy a small plant that is a small bonsai prepared and sold as bonsai, or material that could be made into bonsai. But there's a long tradition in bonsai of collecting much older trees from the mountains In Japan, this is called yamadori. Yamadori being a tree from the mountains, right?
Oh, okay.
When it's collected from the mountains, they're looking for a tree that, because it has struggled to survive in the mountains for so many years in really harsh conditions, that tree might be small and stunted already,
Right.
but it can be collected and brought back to be put in a pot and raised and grown. And so those trees can sometimes be many hundreds of years old, even before they're collected.
Wow.
And those are prized, but not accessible to all of us.
I
and so
just can't
sometimes
see.
we want to look for where are the opportunities to appreciate that art form in a more accessible way, which is actually really an important aspect of bonsai to me.
Now, you mentioned that with the ficus, that you take that out, you may bring that inside for the winter months, but you take that outside. Is there any temperatures that you wait for before you bring it outside?
I always use the 50-degree mark as my point at which I can put my ficus outside. I'm looking for low temperatures at night to not really be dipping below 50 degrees for an extended period. Because when I move my ficus outside, I want to transition them gradually so that they don't get shocked from being inside behind a window for almost 6 months to directly out in bright sun. I'll move them out into shade first and do a transitional process. So I don't want to start that too early and then have to bring them back in for another week or two and then try and put them back out.
And that would probably stress them out too much to do that back and forth.
Absolutely. And as it is, I find, at least in comparison to when they're outside during the summer months, I find it difficult to keep ficus happy during the winter. I put them in a window where they can get, right up next to the window where they can get as much light as possible. I manage the watering and the fertilizing for them as best I can during the winter. But in those winter months, they just have so much less light. And my own personal choice in keeping tropicals inside is that I don't provide additional light, which I know is something that some bonsai practitioners do. So they kind of struggle with less light during the winter.
Right.
But when you get them outside for a couple months in the summer, they just start thriving and growing, and they're so strong and vigorous that you can really tell that difference from the summer months to the spring months.
So we talked about lighting. What about watering? Because most people kill plants by overwatering.
Absolutely, and I've found that myself. You introduced me as a person who's done bonsai for 25 years, and indeed that is the case. But I kind of joke with myself that for 15 or 20 of those 25 years, I was just doing my best to try to keep a plant alive in a pot, right? And watering is one of the biggest challenges. Watering bonsai is one of the biggest difficulties. And I think the thing that people struggle with the most is that they want to schedule. They want to ask us, how often should I water this tree? And they want us to say every 3 days or once a week or some kind of measured thing like that. That is not really the way it is. The answer that I give, and I apologize for the answer sounding sarcastic because I don't mean to be, is that you water the tree when it needs water. I literally walk out into my garden and put my hand onto the pot and sometimes dig my finger down into the soil to see if that soil feels damp still. And if the soil feels damp still, then I know I don't need to water that tree. When I start feeling that soil drying out is when I know I need to water that tree. And so that means individual attention to each individual tree. Not a big deal if you've got 3 or 4 bonsai and you need to decide if you need to water them.
But I hear you have hundreds.
Well, not hundreds. I have about 100 bonsai, about 100 trees in pots.
Right.
So it does take a little bit of time to pay attention to them well enough. And that's something I have to check every day. Because even if I have 2 or 3 trees that need water that day, I want to not miss those trees because it will impact their overall health.
And do you think that maybe a moisture meter might help? Or is that something that could be a problem?
I've known some who use moisture meters, and there's even kind of old tricks that people use that serve as moisture meters. One of the tools, a couple tools on the table here that we use all the time, people think of bonsai and they might think about the bonsai shears and tools like that. But one of the tools that most every bonsai practitioner uses is chopsticks.
Okay.
And so one of the tricks that people will use is taking a chopstick or a part of a chopstick and pushing it all the way down into the soil and leaving it there.
Oh.
And they will pull the chopstick out to see how wet the chopstick is, to see what that moisture level is down in the soil. So little tricks like that to be able to monitor the moisture in your soil, whatever works for you. And that is something that I come back to all the time. Whatever works for you is a super important part of bonsai. Whatever works for you and your trees in your setting, in your yard, with the amount of light you get, the amount of wind you get, the amount of water you get, and the type of trees and pots and soil that will all make the frequency that you need to water vary, which is why I always come back to water the tree when it needs water.
And I do tell people that on windy days, the wind whisks water out of the pots a lot faster than the sun dries out the pots.
Absolutely. The maple forest on my left here is an interesting example because obviously maples are deciduous. This plant is just pushing out these new leaves.
I know.
They're quite small. In fact, some of the buds are just starting to swell in various places, while others have already extended to 6 or even 8 leaves in some places.
Right.
But as that tree goes from dormant with no leaves on it at all, where it needs water very, very rarely, even if the weather's warm, to pushing out these leaves. Leaves are the mechanism by which plants move water, and not everybody really realizes that. So it is the pores in the leaf surface that allows water to transpire off of the leaf that is what draws water up through the root system and up through the vascular tissue of the tree. So when this tree goes from dormant to all of a sudden having a lot of leaves on it, all of a sudden it starts going through water so much faster.
Yes,
and we need to water more often.
That makes sense.
And then you get a windy day and it's that much worse because that wind is blowing by, pulling all of that water off of those leaves. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And what about fertilizing?
Another really important aspect, and in fact, if I were to start with the most basic things, that's what we need to think about, right? Light, water, fertilizer, and air is one that I would put in there as well, which is maybe a little more interesting, but let's talk about fertilizer first and I can come back around to that.
Yes, we'll come back.
Fertilizer is another one of those things where whatever works for you is great. In different situations, different things are going to work better for you. There's a lot of bonsai professionals and bonsai practitioners who recommend slow release, organic, granular, or solid fertilizers. So there are so many different varieties of fertilizer out there. There's liquid fertilizers and solid fertilizers. There's chemical and organic. And if you just think about those, the variety of choices you have is huge. Probably more important than whether it's a chemical fertilizer or organic, or solid or liquid, is that you are not putting a really strong fertilizer on bonsai. There are fertilizers that we may use in the garden or in agriculture that are like in the 20s with our NPK values, like a 20-20-20 or some numbers like that. And there are a lot of folks in bonsai that want to use stuff in the 5 and 10 range, keeping it much lower. There's a lot of conversation about it. It's one of those things where you can go to a Bonsai Society meeting, talk about fertilizer, and everybody's got a different way to do it. But I think that that's okay. What's important is what works for you. The one piece I want to add to that, though, is that bonsai, for many of us, is a process of developing trees. And it takes a lot of time. And so what I mean by that is if I were to buy a tiny little tree, actually to pull a tree out in front of me, there's
looks like a juniper.
A juniper, it is, a little Shimpaku juniper. So this juniper was a cutting that I took from another juniper. It's grown roots, it's growing on its own. So this is a potential future bonsai, and one that I count among the 100 trees that I have in my garden, but it's not styled yet. This tree is in development. It is growing so that it will have a trunk and branches that I can work with to style at a later date. But the tree being in development means that I might want to feed that with a stronger fertilizer as opposed to the boxwood that sits next to me. And this tree has been styled, and the style of this tree has been refined over a number of years. And I don't want this tree to grow too fast, because then I would lose the styling. So the difference between fertilizer can also be dictated by where that tree is in its development.
And that makes sense. And also, what about time of year? Because most plants go dormant in the winter months, even if they're indoor plants.
There's a lot of subtlety to this. There's an obvious trend that we could probably all recognize, that trees start growing in the spring, and we might assume, okay, well, if they start growing hard in the spring, then we want to make sure they've got all the nutrients that they need to do that. But depending on where your tree is in its development, if you feed that tree too much in the spring, then it might push growth that's too heavy, too strong, too coarse to be able to allow you to maintain that, that image. But as a general rule, fertilizing from spring through fall is a good practice. There are examples where you would even fertilize throughout the winter.
Okay.
But the numbers and the variations of what type of fertilizer you use might vary. And again, that starts to go back to, what are you trying to do with the tree? If I'm really trying to make it grow fast and hard so I can make some styling decisions, versus if I'm refining it and trying to keep it tight, will impact how much fertilizer I'm getting. And the variety of the tree. The way that I would decide to fertilize a maple will be very different from the way that I decide to fertilize a pine.
And the other thing, I mean, in nature, boxwoods bolt in the spring.
Right.
Which means they're already thriving and growing without the fertilizer. So I would imagine that kind of applies to a bonsai that's a boxwood.
Absolutely.
Boxwood that's bonsai.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, one of the things we have to remind ourselves in bonsai practice is that trees hold nutrients in their vascular tissue.
Right.
So if you fertilize a boxwood really well toward the end of the summer and into the fall, that tree is going to be all ready to go with the nutrients that it needs when it starts its spring growth. So I don't really need to put much fertilizer on this plant. It's got buds, aplenty. In fact,
Yes,
it's going to get really dense as it starts growing out, because each tip where you might have just a couple of leaves might have 2 or 4 new sets of leaves that are all going to come out and open up into multiple sets of leaves. So it will get very dense, and I'll actually have to be removing leaves from this to keep it styled. So it really doesn't need a whole lot of fertilizer at this stage. I just want to make sure that it continues to be a strong and healthy plant. And
speaking of pruning, that's one of the questions that I always get at the store is, I just bought this, how do I, and it's usually with a ficus that they're really asking, or a heather.
Right.
They may be asking. So what about pruning? What do you say to folks when it comes to pruning bonsais? Or is that a question that they really need to come to you as your protege and come for your mentorship?
I think there's a lot of information out there that can help you learn bonsai. I do believe in the power of learning from other people, one-on-one, face-to-face, working with a mentor, working with a bonsai society where others are doing the same thing you're doing, and you can ask those questions and get those answers. But I believe someone can buy a plant and do a little pruning. The important thing is not to overdo it, right? If you prune that plant, you have just done a big thing to that plant that plant should have time to recover from. And then, so after you've done some pruning, you should leave it alone. Let it grow, let it be strong. Don't even start until you know the plant's really healthy. That's always first. If you always want to have a healthy plant first, you don't prune a healthy plant. You don't repot a healthy plant. You don't do bonsai styling on an unhealthy plant, right?
And we're beginning to, I can't believe the time is getting there, but If you want to take a minute for repotting and just when do you repot? And by the way, I know you're coming back where you will give us a potting demonstration of bonsai, which I'm looking forward to. But is there anything about repotting at this time that you can say to beginners?
So by way of intro to the concept of repotting, one of the ways that we keep a tree small is pruning it on the top, but we also need to prune the roots. And the only way to do that is to remove that tree from the pot, take a look at those roots, prune them. Gently is important, right? Some people equate repotting to open heart surgery. So it's something that you have to do carefully. But it is something that's almost always done in the springtime, right as growth is beginning. So I have actually been actively repotting for the past couple of weeks, and I'll have more repotting to do on different varieties of trees over the weeks to come. And it's done in the spring, right as they're starting to grow, where you can do that root work and the tree's really well set because it's starting that growth cycle to recover from that. And as it's starting to grow new leaves, it's also going to start to grow new roots, and you want to take advantage of that natural cycle so that you keep the root mass fresh and strong and healthy and growing just like you want the top of the tree to be.
So in closing, if people are interested in bonsai plants, who do they contact? Can they contact you? Can they contact the society?
If they want to learn more about bonsai and get involved with the Northern Virginia Bonsai Society, they can certainly go to our website, which is at nvbsbonsai.org.
And we'll be putting that up on the screen as well so people can see that.
Excellent. And that website has lots of information, including about meetings, how to join our organization, et cetera. And we invite people to reach out. And there's a possibility to email us through the website as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So the creation of a bonsai is an art form that brings relaxation to many practitioners. And for those of us who aren't bonsai artists, we still feel a sense of peace. When I look at a bonsai plant, I feel like I've just stepped into my own personal garden. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris. If you have any plant or gardening questions, contact me at misty@burkenursery.com. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me and Aaron here at Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden.
Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.